Last week, I turned these jeans I didn't wear into the perfect shorts for summer, and I knew I wanted to use the scraps for another project. So the hot temperatures here in Spokane, Washington spoke to me and said, let's make a top. So let me bring you along as I show you how I turned these denim scraps into a corset. So the first thing I did was take the denim legs apart, and I used a seam ripper and scissors, and that gave me 4 different pieces to work with. I just wanted to gauge how much actual fabric I had. The next step was to iron it out. This is really important because we want to see exactly how much space we have. After I ironed all the pieces, I went to my mannequin to start draping and see what the fabric was going to tell me. I usually get my best ideas this way, so I started with like a little boxy top, and then as I started adding the panels, I had this idea. I thought, okay, great, it's time for a corset. So I did have enough fabric to actually make a corset. So I grabbed my tracing paper and started with the center line. And I'm using a mannequin, but you could also use a top that fits you really well if that's easier, or if you don't have a mannequin. And you're essentially just trying to get the shape and distance across the top, the sides, the bottom, and the middle. So you just want to make sure that you map that out so you have enough fabric to create the design that you're looking for. Then I brought it over to my drafting table and marked the dead center of the top. And I'm really going to focus on just the left side because we'll fold it in half. So then I'm going to draw out the actual design. And so for the top, I squared it off. That was going to be easier for me to sew. It does make it easier for me for the shape. Then I did straight lines along the side, and I did decide on a slight point in the center. You could also do that rounded or change the shape of the bust area as well as the bottom, really depending on what your personal preferences are. So then to create the interesting part of this top, I just took my ruler and added a little bit of curve to the top of each of these strips. Again, I made this pretty simple. I just added 2 strips on the side, the centerpiece, and then 2 strips on the right-hand side. But you could, make those different shapes. You can add more in there if you wanted to get a little more intricate. It actually would be super cool to use different colored denim as well to get a really interesting effect. So once you've drawn that out to make sure you get a perfectly matching pattern, then you're going to take that piece of paper and fold it in half at that center line that you marked. When you do that, that's going to ensure when you go to cut it out that everything is perfectly aligned. Now, I did start originally leaving a seam allowance here, about 5/8 of an inch. And then I decided, no, I'm just going to cut out these pieces and do the seam allowance on the actual fabric. So it made it way easier. After I cut out the pattern pieces, I did make sure to label each one just to make sure that I didn't get them confused, because we are going to end up with 5 different pieces. Now I'm going to sit on this image right here for a second in case you wanted to do a screenshot. This is the part that took me the longest, just figuring out this pattern. So if you struggle with that, you might want to take a look at this just to remind you of one way that it can be successful for the shape of the top. But again, this is all personal preference, and you can make this totally your own. And then I took those pieces back over to the mannequin just to make sure that everything was fitting how I wanted before I cut it out on the actual fabric, since we only have a little bit of fabric with these denim legs. That brings us to the next step, which is actually cutting out your pieces. This is why labeling the pieces in the beginning is so important. So you can cut these out in whichever order you want. I started with the center and then went to the sides, but you just want to ensure that you're getting a nice clean cut on these. One thing, as I mentioned before, I did add a little bit of a seam allowance. Again, it's really up to you however much space you think you're going to need when you're using your sewing machine. And so that's why I'm cutting it out a little bit more. And I wasn't being very exact with this because, again, I wasn't quite sure how this was going to turn out. But now that I know that it fits, I'm going to be able to reuse these pieces, and so will you, for additional projects. So it's pretty fantastic. Now, the next step is to pin your pieces together. So you're going to put right sides together and then pin from the center piece to those initial second pieces. And you're just going to pin all the way down, just making sure everything is perfectly aligned. I do recommend doing that on both sides. That way when you're over at the sewing machine, you can just sew those two together. So we're going to take those, pin this next side right here, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine. And because you're working with denim, you may have to adjust your settings on your machine because it is a little bit thicker material, so a more heavy-duty needle, as well as your thread. These are all things just to take into consideration. Use a test piece. Hopefully you have a little bit of leftover denim just to make sure that you get the perfect stitch that you're looking for. Then after you sew the first 3 pieces together, you're going to add those additional side pieces. And then, as with almost every sewing project, you do want to come back and press your seams open, especially because this top is going to be a flat top against your body. Just making sure you press those will give you a nice clean fit. Also, one other thing that I will do next time is add a liner. I didn't line this piece. I was in a hurry to get it done. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, so I omitted that step, but I would definitely recommend it going forward. Now, before you create the side panels, which are just going to be additional rectangles, I do recommend folding your piece in half and making sure that it's 100% symmetrical. You saw that I didn't really, map out those pieces very well. I just kind of eyeballed them. So you'll see at the top, I do need to even that out. The bottom is pretty close to perfect. So we're just going to cut it on the top and the bottom just to make sure we have a perfect match. And then for the side panels, I just cut out rectangles for each side and stitched those on as well, just made sure that they lined up. Now the step I forgot to record is to show you how I finished the top and the bottom, but essentially I just folded the edges under and then I did a top stitch all the way around. If you were doing a lining, that would be a different process, but because this denim, I don't care if it frays because I think it'll add to the character, I did just fold it under, press it, and then top stitch it. Now, to connect the garment to the back of it, you can do this a number of ways. You could add Velcro if you made the pieces long enough. I didn't have enough fabric to make it long enough. So what I decided to do was to add these rivets and then make it a lace up back, which does really align with that corset style that I was looking for. And then I couldn't let those awesome hems go to waste, so I cut off the hems from all 4 pieces and I used them as a halter. And this is really helpful. It keeps it in place. It looks pretty cool. You're reusing this additional fabric here, and I just lined it all up, stitched it so it wouldn't fray too much anymore, and then I just stitched it to the front. Again, you can see as I pull this forward, I used some pinking shears on the back to help prevent fraying, but going forward, I would absolutely add a lining. And then the last step was to add the lacing, and I decided to use some yarn that I already had. Again, this is a no-cost project, and I just weaved it through the grommets in the back, which gave it that lace detail, made it flexible for fit, and also really completed that corset look. And here's how it turned out. I'm so happy with this project. I will absolutely be making this again. So let me know if you try this or if you have any questions. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, everybody, see ya!